Hey, it's Lycia from Caught by Design. Today, I'm going to show you how to use Etchall etching cream to create this salt and pepper shaker holder set, and also how to create a coordinating decal for the salt and pepper shaker holder. So first of all, let me tell you what kind of supplies you're going to need. For the project, you're going to need your blank. So I'm using this salt and pepper shaker that's in a little galvanized basket. I got it from Hobby Lobby. And you'll need your stencils, some transfer tape, a weeding hook, a squeegee, some rubbing alcohol, and a lint-free cloth or paper towel, some painter's tape, your etchall etching cream, your etchall squeegee, and then I've got a little plastic spoon here to dip out my etchall if I need it. Now I have also got a stencil cut out of black vinyl that I'm going to put around the edge here. Before we get into weeding and applying the stencil, I want to show you how I created the design in Silhouette Studio. So I just measured around the holder and the salt and pepper shakers, and the holder was about 10 3/4 inches around, and the salt and pepper shakers were about 6 inches around. I estimated that I wanted my design to be about 1/2 inch tall. So I just used the drawing tools in Silhouette Studio to draw a rectangle that was 10 3/4 by 1/2 inch. And then I duplicated that rectangle and changed the width to 6 inches. So there I have the measurement for the holder and for the salt and pepper shakers. I'm using the border design by Fox Sister. That's Silhouette Design Store ID 296956. So I just double clicked on that to load it into my design page. And then I duplicated it twice. You can do that a couple of different ways. You can hit Control plus your right arrow on a PC, or Command plus a right arrow on a Mac, or you can use the Object, Replicate, Duplicate Right. So I have 3 sets of that border, and I'm just going to group them together. And then I'm going to resize it. Now I want to make sure that my aspect ratio is locked here. I want to keep that proportion the same. So I'm just going to lock that, and then I'm going to change my height to 1/2 inch. And then I'll just move this over that rectangle and see that I've got about the right dimensions. Mainly I want to make sure that it's longer than that rectangle. So I'm going to duplicate it so I have another one to work with. I'll move it up into that rectangle. And then I'm going to make sure that my group of the design, the 3 that I put together, is longer than that rectangle I drew. This one is, so that's good. Now I'm going to center it right in the middle of that rectangle. And check the ends here. So see how that end of the rectangle kind of splits that in half. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to stretch this out so that the edge of the rectangle hits right in between that border design, in between a couple of the pieces. Now, you won't be able to do that with all border designs, but with this one you can. So just make sure that it ends in a clean place. And for this, I'm actually going to make sure that it starts and stops in a logical place so that when I wrap it around, I'll just get a nice continuous design there. Now that I've modified that, I'll duplicate it again. And then I'm going to use the crop tool. So I want to make my rectangle just a little bit larger on the top and the bottom so that it doesn't sit right up against that border and crop any off of the top or the bottom. So I'm just going to stretch that out just a little bit. Then I'll select them both and go to Object, Modify, Crop. And that will just cut that border into the same dimensions as the rectangle. But you'll see it also made all of these little pieces separate. So I'm going to delete a couple of those at the end and then group the rest of it together or convert it to a path or make a compound path. Any of those will work. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the smaller rectangle using that duplicated border. I'll just find a spot where it matches up well. But then I need to adjust it just a little bit for those ends, just like I did with the larger rectangle. Now, it won't hurt to just stretch it a little bit, or in this case, shrink it a little bit. You know, just whatever I need to do, as long as it's not a lot different from the larger rectangle. I just want to make my ends there have a place where I can cut it cleanly. So once again, I will center it within the rectangle. I'll adjust that top and bottom just a little bit. Select them both and go to Object, Modify, Crop. Now you'll see that I have a couple of pieces on each end that would have to match up exactly to look right. So I am going to get rid of those in a little bit. So just hang with me and I'll show you. Now remember, when I cropped it, it divided all of this into a bunch of separate pieces. So I want to make a compound path out of that so it'll be all one unit. And then we're ready to work on the S and the P using a font. So I'm just going to type out S and P just in the default font. And I'm going to go over here to my text style panel and use the font Baby Giovanni script by Mytha Studio. That's Silhouette Design Store ID 312547. I'm going to fill it with black and change the line color to black. Now watch this neat little tool that you'll have if you have Designer Edition or above. This eyedropper at the bottom of the column on the left is the Transfer Properties tool. So when I selected the P and then clicked on the Transfer Properties tool and then on the S, it transferred all the properties of the S to the P. The same font, the same fill color, the same line color. Now it's time to resize the fonts, but let's look closely at them for a moment. Do you see how this box around here includes some blank space at the top and the bottom? That's a very common problem with fonts and when you're trying to size them, because depending on how the font is designed, the software recognizes some extra space based on whatever the tallest font is in the set, the tallest character. So that does not give you an accurate measurement if you're just looking at the dimensions of your bounding box. The way to get around this is to change it into a compound path or convert it to a path. Then the bounding box will hug it tightly and you'll know exactly what the dimensions are. Now, if you click on this font right now, you'll see the green box around it. That's because it's editable text. It doesn't really matter as much when you're typing just single characters like this, but if you had a word or a phrase and you changed it to a path or to a compound path, or you converted it to a path, it would no longer be editable text. So it's just a really good idea to always make a copy of your editable text before you start modifying it. So I'm just going to make a copy of this, move it off to the side, And then I will take my original and change it to a compound path or convert it to a path. So now you can see when I select one of the letters, the bounding box hugs tightly around the edge, and I can resize it more accurately and be able to look at the bounding box for those dimensions. So I'm going to resize these to a little bit more than 1/2 inch wide so it'll fit on my salt and pepper shakers. And then here's a trick for you. I'm actually going to print this out on a piece of paper first to check my sizing. So I need to change my page size to a letter size. If you were already using a letter size, that's fine. I was using 12 by 12. So I'm going to resize my design page to a letter size sheet, arrange those designs on the page where I can print them out, and then I will print them out, trim around them with scissors, and just see if the design actually fits on my blank like I'm expecting it to. Turns out it was a good thing that I printed them out on paper first because my border for the salt and pepper shakers does need to be modified a bit. Remember when I pointed out to you earlier that there's these little designs on each end that would have to match up exactly? Well, I don't want that, so I've released the compound path and I'm just deleting those little sections. Then I'm going to select it all again, make another compound path, and then just stretch it out to where I have a lot cleaner design. So like I said, I can change the dimensions just a little bit and it's not going to matter. I'm just stretching it out a little bit, and this is going to make a much better design. I'll print it out one more time, check it again to make sure, and then once I feel real confident about it, I will be ready to actually cut it on my silhouette. Now that I'm feeling good about the size, it's time to add the weeding boxes and set it up to cut. So I just drew a rectangle here, but I'm going to do one more thing. So I like to use the software to help me with any kind of alignment issues. So I'm going to add an extra 1/4 inch to the bottom of this weeding box. That way I can just take the bottom of the stencil, align it with the bottom of the salt and pepper shaker, and I'll get a perfect spacing around there at the bottom. So I just made my weeding box 3/4 of an inch tall. Then I will select both the weeding box and the border, align it in the center and at the top. Give myself just a little more wiggle room here on the left and the right and the top, not adjusting the bottom, just the sides and the top. That way my stencil doesn't cut right up next to the border. Group that together. And then duplicate it so I have one for both the salt shaker and the pepper shaker. I'm going to do something similar with the S and the P and use a weeding box to help me with alignment. I measured and I know that the space where I want to put the S and the P is 1.25 inches wide. So I'm going to make my weeding box 1.25 inches wide and then align my letter in the center of that weeding box. I'll group the weeding box together with the letter, arrange them on the page to save on materials, and then I'll go into the Send panel, select Vinyl Glossy for my material type, since that's what I'm making my stencil out of, and send the job to cut. So we want to weed our stencil first. And there's a difference in how you weed a decal versus how you weed a stencil. So for a vinyl decal, like we're going to put on the outer portion of the basket, you actually peel away the parts of the design that you don't want. So this is pretty easy to weed. I actually can just pick it up. I'm going to pull it very carefully and hopefully not have a lot that I need to pull out with my weeding tool. See how nicely that weeded? So that's going to be my design for the outside. But for an etching stencil, you want to weed away the parts of the design that you want. So I've already weeded out the P and the S and this part of the stencil. And then I'm just going to go through here with my weeding tool. I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to pick out these little pieces. And being careful not to fold it back on itself. I'll just pick those up. And you might like to use some tweezers. Just your weeding tool of choice. And there you go. Now I've got a weeding box drawn around each design. So I can just take this, pull it off, and I have my nice stencils. Now, before I decided what size to cut these, I actually printed them out on a piece of paper. So I had to angle it to make it work. But see, I printed it out. So this is the long design that goes around the edge, the shorter one for the salt and pepper shakers, and the S and the P. So when I did it the first time and I wrapped it around there, you'll see that it didn't quite fit. I had a space. Same way with the salt and pepper shakers. When I wrapped it around there, I saw that it didn't fit, so I had to work on it a little bit. And so I kept resizing it until I got one that worked just like I wanted it, and I could kind of preview it. And so that fits nice. That's going to be perfect. And then my salt and pepper shakers, I have the design where it fits nicely. And then I'll be able to put the P and the S right above it. Now, I'm going to leave a little bit of space here at the bottom. So just for visual interest. So I made my stencil have that space at the bottom so that I could use it to help me align it. Rather than trying to eyeball it and get it, perfectly straight around here, I just left that space on the bottom of the stencil, and that will help me align it. So let's put on the stencils. I'm going to peel off these little stickers here. We don't need those. And I'll probably go ahead and take these off too. I've got my workspace protected here with some paper, and I'm just going to clean this off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a cloth. You could use glass, like a glass cleaning cloth, or even little alcohol wipes that you get in the medical supply. Just want to clean off that dust and debris. Do the same thing with this one. And then I'm going to take my scissors, separate these out. I'm going to take a piece of transfer tape that's a little bit bigger than the decal. Now that transfer tape is reusable. So let me just, I want to make sure it's big enough. So let's just cut it about like that. Take that off. And I'm just going to lay that on there and squeegee it down very well. I'm kind of working from the middle out. And then I'm going to peel that off. And if it's got any where it lifts up like that, just lay it back down, squeegee it some more, peel it again. Just go kind of slow. Okay, now remember I said I was going to use that edge there to go around the edge of my salt and pepper shaker. I think I'm going to do this where I can see that just a little bit better. Okay. I feel a little bit better about that. Let's try to get it straight. Wrap it around. Press it down. It should come out pretty darn close here. And I'm just going to slowly. Okay, I'm feeling good about that. So let's just kind of going in one direction so I don't, you don't want to rub like that. Just kind of go in one direction. Okay, now let's peel our transfer tape off and check out our stencil. Oops, I see right there. See how it doesn't want to lay down? Just rub it back over there. Rub it down really well. You don't want any air pockets, especially on those curves. You really want that stencil to adhere. All right, I'm just going to make sure that's really pressed down nice. Okay, so I just reused my piece of transfer tape. And I'm going to squeegee it down like we did before. And just repeat the process. so we don't get it upside down. Just going to kind of put it on there loosely at first. See, we just got our little spots meeting up there. Nice, nice, nice. And then we're going to squeegee that down. Just pull that off. And then you can decide which side you want your salt and pepper on, and do the same thing. Let's just get a piece of transfer tape for that. And we kind of want to make sure they're about the same. See better if I do it like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the P. Okay, now I'm going to cover all of the rest of this with some painter's tape to cover up the parts that I don't want to etch without covering up any of my stencil. So let me take a break, come back to that, and we'll be ready to put on our etching cream. Okay, I'm back and I've covered all the areas of the glass that I don't want to etch with this blue painter's tape. And I've been real careful not to let the painter's tape overlap anywhere where I want to etch. So see, like right there where that design is, I want to make sure that the tape doesn't touch that, because the etchall will not etch through that tape. And that's exactly what we want for the other areas, but we want to make sure all our stencil areas are exposed and not covered up. Now you could, if you were concerned about any kind of air pockets, or if your stencil didn't seem to want to stick, you could actually hit this with a heat gun a little bit. Don't get so close that you'll melt it, but just kind of go over it a little bit, and that'll help it adhere a little bit better. But this is adhering very nicely, and I think we're going to get a really good etch from it. So I've got a little plastic cup here that I'm going to put my etchall in. You could dip it straight out of the bottle, but I just like to put it in another container. And when I open this etchall, this is a newly opened container, but you'll see that it's dark brown. Don't worry about that if you see that your etchall is light brown, like a caramel color. It can range. It can range from, say, a cream color, almost white, to caramel, to this dark chocolate pudding like. Still gonna work, not a problem. And this is a little bit thick, but that keeps it from running. And one of the things I like the best about etchall is that there's no odor. I have used some etching creams in the past that I almost felt like I needed to be wearing a mask or something to protect from the fumes, because it was so caustic smelling, but etchall is not like that. It's also reusable, and you can just scrape it back in there. This is just a small sample bottle that I've got, but you know, they sell it in bigger bottles. I've got several bottles around here, large, small, and everything in between. Now, when you put the etchall onto the glass, it's going to start etching right away. Wherever you put it, it's going to start to work. So we're going to put the first little bit on an area that has the painter's tape, because that way I can start spreading it a little more uniformly. So I'm going to take this squeegee, love the etchall squeegee, and I liken it to frosting a cake. So if you've ever frosted, say, a chocolate cake with white frosting, you know that if you dig down too hard, you're going to get those crumbs in that white icing, and you don't want that. So I don't scrape along the surface. I just kind of glide, and so I'm leaving the cream in between the squeegee and the glass. And I make it to where I can't really see the design as much anymore. I think that works better. And I'll put that on there. And I'm just going to go around. Now this one, a little bit trickier because it's on all sides, but we can still do it. And I'm going to try to get it just as evenly as I possibly can. Another great thing that I like about etchall, it only takes 15 minutes to work, but it doesn't hurt if you leave it on longer. I have left things on for hours and still got a nice etch. And I don't mind having it on for longer because it doesn't smell, like I said. No odor. When I teach a class, I offer for people, if they want to wear rubber gloves or like an apron to protect their clothing, but I've never had a problem with it, so I just use my bare hands. So I'm just going to keep putting that on there, and then I'm going to put it on the one that's for the pepper shaker. This little corner is a little more tricky because it's rounded. As long as I get that covered. And then I am going to leave them to sit for at least 15 minutes. Don't worry about being generous. Don't feel like you're wasting your cream, because when we're done, we're just going to scrape this back into the bottle and it'll be there to use again. So I'm feeling good about that. I'm going to set it over here to the side while I work on the other shaker. You'll see that as it's sitting there, it's not dripping because it's nice, thick. It's got a nice consistency. And again, the etching creams I've used in the past, they were messy, runny. Sometimes they had little grit in them and they didn't etch well. And I have had great success with etchall. I've been using etchall for about 6 years now, and it is wonderful. So let me just work on this pepper shaker the same way. While we're letting those sit, I'm going to show you how to apply the decal to the galvanized holder. So let me just clean up this right here. Now there are some items that you can etch other than glass. Galvanized metal is not one of them. But if you wanted to check to see if it could be etched, just take a toothpick and dip into the etchall and do a little spot check on the bottom. I did try that and it was right here. It left a little mark, but not anything like what I really wanted. I want this design to stand out. So I decided that to put vinyl on it rather than to try to etch it. So I'm just going to cut off the tag. We don't need the tag. And then I'm going to just wipe it off, not with any alcohol, just this cloth, just to kind of get off any dust and dirt. And I'm going to use what's known as the hinge method to put this on, because I want to make sure it's straight and it meets and everything's nice and neat. So I think the hinge method will be our best bet there. So to use the hinge method, you leave the backing on the vinyl when you're placing the decal, and then you peel it off. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. So I am using a different kind of transfer tape than I used for the etchall stencil. I'm actually using a clear transfer tape. You can use any kind of transfer tape you like. I just like this clear because I can see through it. And I've put it over the decal, you know, with the weeding box and everything. And I could have taken all of this excess off, but I really just wanted to see this box here. And I've already loosened the vinyl. I did not take it off and put it back on, but I did loosen it because sometimes the vinyl can be stubborn, and I'd rather know that it's going to come off of the transfer tape before I get to where I'm trying to apply it. So I have just taken this and just kind of gently peeled it back. If there were some stubborn areas, I would rub it a little bit more. I find that it's easier to kind of bend that vinyl down. You see I'm doing it from the back to kind of break that adhesive and keep pulling. But that loosened it up. And then I just laid it back down and kind of smoothed it out. I'm going to trim around it with my scissors. And you can trim really close to the decal if you want. I'm just going to kind of trim close to the weeding box. And what this allows you to do is to place the decal without being committed to it being stuck down. So it gives you a little more flexibility to move it. I am going to trim pretty close to this right here because I need to see where these ends meet up. And once again, I'm going to start maybe, well, I don't know if I'll start on a corner or if I'll just kind of put it here. Let's see how this works. This has got a little seam in the backs or on the side, so I'm going to consider that the back. Doesn't really matter where I start because I've created the design so that it matches up like that. But let's just try to get it where it's maybe kind of here in the middle. We get a piece of painter's tape. I'm going to get that as straight as possible. And I want that kind of moved down just a little bit. I'm trying to kind of guesstimate halfway between, say, this and the bottom here, but not be too finicky about it. Just do the best I can. And then I'm going to bring that around. I'm going to go ahead and tape it on the side here. And on this side. Laying that as flat as possible and as taut as possible, because I don't want to get any little bubbles or anything when I put my decal on. And see, that's going to meet up very nicely there, because that's how I created the design. Now, if you were putting this on a flat object, you could just put the hinge either right here in the middle, or, you know, if you were going horizontally. I'm taping this more because it's actually wrapping around. So let's just put some tape there and there. And see, that looks very, very nice right there. If it was a flat object, I would just be working probably with the one hinge, but we're going to do this just in little sections at a time so that we don't have this whole big decal and then possibly get off kilter. So I'm going to work on this part right here first. So that's not leaving me much room there. So let me kind of tape it over here. See if it's still lining up good. Sometimes these things aren't perfectly square, but this one looks, yeah, pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel that decal back, and then I'm going to trim off the backing, not the transfer tape, the backing. Lay that back down and squeegee it really well. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to peel this off, and then I'm going to lift that up. Don't worry about that. That's just the design. It's in pieces. You know that. So I want that vinyl to stay on the transfer tape. I'm just going to peel off little sections. Lay it back down. Lift up a little more. That one's a little trickier because I didn't cut it right where the design ended. So we may have to, yeah, there we go. See how that one lifted off? Okay, so just go slow, just like you did with your weeding of your stencils. Just go slowly. Here I'm going to go all the way to the middle hinge, I think. I'm feeling pretty good about that, as long as I can lift up. Well, it starts to bend like that. Just put it back down. We want that off. And we want it all to stick to the transfer tape. See how nicely that's lining up. I can actually go ahead and just trim away that transfer tape for now. Now you could keep working around like this, or you could work from the other side in. I think I am going to continue working around because I don't want a bubble here in the middle. I don't want to start here and then find out that I'm a tad off. So I think I'm just going to keep working around here because I have, remember, several hinges, not just one hinge. And I also have the advantage of having a decal that is separate little pieces. It's not like I've got one long word. So just slow and steady wins the race here. In there. Okay. So we have this nice little decal. And we're ready to rinse off our salt and pepper shakers and see how the etch turned out. Now we're ready to rinse it off and reveal our design. Now I have a stainless steel sink, and it's an old stainless steel sink, but I've used it for years with etchall with no problem. Etchall will not etch on stainless steel, but if you have a porcelain sink, I would recommend that you maybe put a dish tub in it to do your rinsing, and then, you know, dispose of your water elsewhere, or just find another sink, or maybe even go outside and just rinse it on to maybe the grass or something. So, okay, let's turn on the water and start rinsing. And as I rinse, I'm going to also start peeling off the stencil and the tape. Now don't get concerned if when your glassware is wet that you don't see the design. A lot of times it doesn't show up until it's dry. And people will etch and they'll think, oh my goodness, you know, it didn't turn out. And all it is that the glass just needs to dry. So let me just rinse this, peel off the tape, and I'm a believer in a lot of tape, so it may take me a minute or two, but I will get all that off, peel off the stencil, and we'll see what we've got. You see right now it looks like I don't have anything. I can actually see the etching underneath, whereas you may not be able to because of the lighting. But see, it looks like it didn't work. Don't be alarmed, because when it dries, you're going to see the beautiful design. And there you go. Let's see if maybe I put this behind it, if you can see it a little better. It's kind of hard to see with the reflection, but it's a beautiful etch.
and I love how they turned out.
I hope you've enjoyed this project, and I hope it's inspired you to try some Etchall etching cream. It is the only brand of etching cream I use, and I look forward to bringing you even more Etchall projects in the coming weeks and months. Thanks for watching.